Hello, welcome to the People Profit Podcast, the show where we flip the script on traditional business thinking and prove that when you put people first, profits follow. I'm Sandra Coker, your guide on this journey to more engaged teams, loyal customers, and a healthier bottom line. These episodes are brought to you by Human Power Solutions, helping organizations unlock the human potential that powers performance. Whether you're a leader, an HR pro, or a curious change maker, buckle up. We're diving into fresh stories, real-world strategies, and a few laughs along the way. Ready to turn your workplace into a profit-powered people machine? Let's get started. What does zoom out mean? Today, we'll find that out when we meet with Mike Charner from Avaaler. He's the founder and CEO of Avaaler out of Australia. Welcome to the People Profit Podcast. So good to have you with us today. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. You are the Avaaler, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. I would love to hear a little bit about what you do, how you do it, and how you get started in this journey of yours.
Well, thanks, Sandra. I'm an executive coach. I specialize really in helping senior finance professionals is where my current niche is, but I'm looking to expand that. And I really help senior finance professionals really accelerate their careers with confidence and clarity in where they want to get to, and really thrive across not just their career, but also their health and their family with really a mindset which they lock in on who they are at their best and showing up as that person and bringing the best of themselves to their work and to their home life.
Wow. That's great. I think a lot of times people in finance are under a lot of pressure. There's bunches of deadlines. You got your quarterly deadlines, your yearly deadlines, at least here in the US. I don't know what it's like over there and down under where you are. But you do, I know that you coach all over the world. So I'm sure you deal with a lot of things. How did you get into coaching? How did you get into doing this? And what's your journey been like?
Well, actually, I've been mentoring people my whole career, actually, since I started my career at PwC. Back then it was Price Waterhouse. And that model is very much a mentoring model. And it's just something that I've been deeply passionate about so for over 34 years now. And I've had some good career success. I've been the CFO for some large companies. AstraZeneca being one in 3 markets in Australia, in Italy, in Denmark, and I've been the chief strategy officer for some public companies as well. But throughout my career, the thing that I've enjoyed most has actually been mentoring and seeing how, with some guidance, you can really help people thrive. And if we can kind of raise the level of people making a real positive impact, right? Adding value at all levels, which is what this business is about. They're going to go and bring the best of themselves, right? And make their own impact in the world. So that's been, I reached my corporate goals. I hit those. And my father passed away back in 2023. And, I just realized how short life was. And I'd had this kind of Avaaler concept inside me since 2013, literally. And I wasn't sure what to do with it. And it kind of just hit me. I was decompressing on a beach in Borneo. And, with my father passing and sort of supporting my family through that. And I hadn't really taken much time to support myself through that, honestly. And so I took a couple of weeks out for some decompression, and it really just hit me. And it was like, Mike, life is short. People tell me I'm a great mentor. I really got to step in and into that power and see what I can do with that. And so that's what I did in 2023.
Wow. Walking away from a career, you obviously, I met you through a mutual mastermind that we belong to, and instantaneously you were very comfortable to talk to. And we just had some great conversations, and I was so excited to talk with you a little bit about this, because I feel like this podcast is for our up and coming leaders and our young leaders coming up, and how important it is to be a good leader, a good coach, a good mentor, to those in your organization. And I was reading a little bit about your early life experiences, and I want to hear a little bit about how did that early life experiences, shape the leadership values that you have today. So, you shared that you helped your dad pack cupboard catches, and you watched him struggle financially, and that kind of really deeply impacted like the career path you took. But it sounds like his passing also influenced like the career path you were born to do. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, you really articulated that nicely, Sandra. I've just always was a passionate person about business and entrepreneurship, and I got started, as you say, at 6, putting these little magnetic, catches that hold the cupboard door in, and he had an importing hardware sort of business, and I started there. And I really had this ambition to be an entrepreneur. But when I was about 16, my father sat my family down and my sister and my mum and said, look, guys, my business isn't doing that well at the moment. And I've actually had to tip some extra money in to help it. And I didn't actually tell your mother about that. And I was sitting on the couch and I was looking at my mum, and she just had this expression of anger, shame, guilt, fear, almost betrayal, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that struck me about that conversation was I just remember thinking, I do not want my wife to ever look at me like that. I actually was surprised that they made that. I was thinking that was all going to be over. But Dad went on and he, was able to recover from that and, was successful. But the story that I told myself was that my father was brilliant at sales and marketing, but he wasn't strong in the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told myself a story that you've got to know the numbers. That will be kind of a risk mitigation for that happening. And so that then put me on a path towards finance. And that's where I started with Price Waterhouse. And that kind of set me on this journey through this CFO pathway in many countries now. But it effectively kind of parked my entrepreneurial ambitions. But they weren't ever dead. They were there.
Yeah.
And so, when my father passed, that kind of switched that all back on again for me. And that allowed me to do that. But I did have a difficult childhood there for a little while. And, from the ages of about 8 to 12, and some stuff happened that I thought I dealt with, but I actually hadn't. And it was sitting deep inside. I just pushed it down. And I had this experience when it was in my 40s. I was actually 2 days into a CFO job. And I woke up at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I went into the bathroom and I looked in the mirror, and I was just almost having this panic attack. And I just had this, that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
And I looked in the mirror and I was like, what's going on? Why do I feel this way? What's happening? And there was, the CEO that I was, reporting to, it was to do with him. And it was to do with the stage that the company was at, where there was some things going on, which I uncovered in those first 2 days. And I thought, what's triggering this? And he'd actually triggered all of the memories that I'd had as this, young child with the stuff I went through back then. And I just realized that, was I going to let something that happened when I was much younger impact me for the rest of my life? And it was there that I decided that no, I was going to face into this. I was going to deal with that, and I was going to move forward. And I'd actually been interviewing for 2 roles, and this was the one I took. It was actually a better, more interesting package, and what I thought was a more interesting role. Anyway, 7 o'clock in the morning, I rang the hiring manager of the other company. And I said, hey, listen, because this woman knew that I was going for this new role, and I was upfront and I explained why it was a better package. And I said, look, this is not working out. There's a big conflict here for me, and I'd like to know if that opportunity is still available. And she said, yes, it is. Actually, here's the number for the CFO. Give him a call. he'll be really happy to take your call. And
Wow.
and she actually said, since we met you, we kind of haven't found someone that was going to fit like we thought you might. And so the bottom line is that, we have things that happen in our past. We don't even know that they're there, but they do hold us back. And the more that we can level up in terms of our own development and deal with some of that stuff, it allows us to then move forward freely. And with the help of a gifted coach, like I shifted that really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And then I went on and had this, stepped into this chief strategy officer role. It was basically my dream role at this big healthcare organization, impacting the lives of many. And that's, I've been in the healthcare industry for over 21 years. And that's a space I really love to play in.
That is amazing. Think about that. Like future leaders, people coming up, we all know people that have had, different experiences, trauma or good things happen in their early life, which then formulates the story for their lives. Right. So how do you think, your history or, someone's background affects them in how they lead or in how motivated they are and their fear? I was kind of thinking a little bit about, when you took the leap to start your company, and thinking back to when you're on the couch thinking, I don't want my wife to ever go through that. Did that ever cross your mind when you were kind of leaving the security and we're going,
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you're operating in a universe, like in a space of safety around in the corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
At least I was, I had a very high profile role. And when I told people I was leaving, like they thought I was mad. Literally, they were like, "What are you doing? You're giving up on everything that you've kind of created." And then I explain what my business is all about. And I'd love to share that with you.
Yes.
And then they're like, "Oh, I get it. What's so you, Mike?" And the thing is that, our experiences shape our lives, right? And I had said no to opportunities that were literally being handed to me, literally, because I didn't feel confident enough or safe enough to go after them because of me carrying this weight in my backpack of this stuff that happened. And so, that we all have these life experiences, and that's part of living, right? Otherwise you live in a cocoon. But we tell ourselves stories of what happens, right? There's facts that happen to us, but then we tell ourselves a story of what happens, and then we make meaning off that story. And I'd been telling myself some stories that weren't serving me. They were keeping me small and safe rather than going for it. And you will have seen it. I'm sure you've seen it in people where they can see the potential in you, but you don't actually sort of feel that, and you don't unlock that because you've got something that's holding you back. And I heard one guy talk about how you get this. It's almost like this big bungee cord, this big elastic cord that, when you move and you try and do something new, you get out of your comfort zone. It feels unsafe, and then you get pulled right back in.
Nice.
And that happened to me time and time again. And through that work I did, I was able to cut that cord and able, to really move forward. And that's, it's a cliche, but the growth does happen outside the comfort zone, and we got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Love that. Thanks. Great saying.
Yeah, exactly.
So, right. I want to ask you about Avaaler. I want to ask you about what that is. Like define what that is. It's someone that seeks to add value. Tell me a little bit, like it's been sitting with this since 2013.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I was doing a bit of soul searching in 2013. And, probably 6 o'clock in the morning, I was writing down, what drives and motivates me. And I wrote down adding value. I kind of thought about it a little bit more, and then I wrote at all levels. And I was like, that just felt really good to me. It just really resonated. And then I kind of thought, I could take the A, the V, the A and the L and make a word. And that's like Avail. that's kind of cool. It's a bit of a play on words of the normal word avail to be a profit or use of benefit. And I thought I really liked that, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I went and bought the number plate Avail. In Australia, that costs $400 a year to buy that. The license, this is the car plate, right? That you put on the registration plate. And I thought, that's a ridiculous amount of money to spend. And I knew it was going to annoy me every time I went to my car until I figured out what I was going to do with that. And so I came up with this definition of what it means to be an availer. And an availer is someone who wants to add value. And they do that by using their resources, which is their knowledge, their networks, their time, their experience, their skills, and their energy to help others get a result that's beyond what they can get on their own. And these are people from all walks of life, Sandra. These are people in business, they're people in healthcare, they're volunteers, they're stay-at-home mums or dads. But what unites them all is if they feel that they can make an impact and help someone get a result beyond what they can get on their own, they almost feel compelled to act.
Right.
And these are people that are real catalysts for positive outcomes. They're basically good people that want to do good shit, Sandra. And, we do not need more people stuck with self-doubt, limiting beliefs, anxiety, in jobs that aren't right for them. And if we can unlock these availers and help them figure out who they are at their best and get them in the right roles, they're going to do amazing things because that's who they are. And so they're the people that I serve. That's why I left a corporate job, because that's what I'm building. And I've actually really, the marketing guys will say, look, you've got to pick your niche. And I've got a good profile and good credentials in the finance area. And so that's where I'm starting. And I know that journey, right? I've been through all of that and have my ups and downs.
That's right.
And so that's where I'm choosing to start. But I'm now getting a lot of clients that are outside of finance. But that's, just the niche that I focus on. But my ambition is I'd love to be able to impact 10 million lives.
I know.
People really figure out
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And, something maybe that's interesting is that part of being an availer is when you see that you can make an impact, you almost feel compelled to act. And part of my journey was that when I had for 3 years, I ran my own CFO advisory and strategy business. And I was working a lot with startups and in the healthcare industry. And my mentor very sadly took his life. And I did not see that coming. I was actually having a really deep conversation with him 2 weeks earlier about all the work I was doing in helping in mental health and strategy and lots of things in that space. And it really rocked me because he was just an incredible man, really, really incredible man. But in parallel to that, we were doing some work on preparing a TV show around health and looking at the top 10 disease areas and could they be cured? And one of the ones was mental health. And we actually did that program around that mental health episode. And we were approached by a very large company in Australia to see if we would set up a mental health foundation that, could really take our mission forward. And so we set up this mental health foundation called Gotcha for Life. And that was in 2017. And, it's now one of the biggest mental health foundations in Australia. It's, we've impacted well over 1.5 million lives. And, as a director, I was company secretary, and some of those emails that come in, will break your heart, but some of them actually fill you with joy. But the concept of being an availer is really when you feel that you can make an impact and there's an opportunity to do that, you almost feel compelled to act. And you reserve your energy. If the person next to you is better equipped to help in a situation, you might reserve your energy for where you can make an impact. It's just getting burnt out in the process, right? Because you need to protect your energy so you can make an impact.
Like you said, one of your guiding principles is when in doubt, zoom out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. So, how do you practice that? And when you're in that chip spot, when you have some blind spot, a lot of leaders have, how can leaders practice zooming out? What does zooming out actually mean?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Sandra, because I can't take credit for that. I got that from Hugh Jackman, the actor, because Hugh has been on the advisory board with me on Gotcha for Life. And it was something that he said once, and I never forgot it. And the way I think about it is that, if you use a sporting analogy and you're on a field, let's take American football, and when you're on the field, you're playing the game, you don't have the same perspective as when you zoom out. When you zoom out, you can see the lines, you can see the players, you can see where the ball is, you can see the crowd, you can see the atmosphere. It's very different. And actually, it is all a game. And when you're in the corporate world, there's a game that's being played around the rules of that organization, and then the rules of your role, how that target operating model, the way that the business works, the rules that it plays by. And when you zoom out, you just get that level of perspective. Even in a dynamic with somebody, you're having a conversation with somebody. If you can zoom out, you get a perspective which is very different than being a player on the field, because you're just looking in one direction.
That's
one dimension, right? And so you can zoom out and you can think, where's this person coming from? What game are they actually playing? Are we playing the same game, or is this person actually on a different field? And it just gives you that level of perspective. And, when I left the corporate world to do my business now of entrepreneurial coaching, mentoring, but in an entrepreneurial, like I am an entrepreneur now, right? And it's very, very different. The rules of the game are totally different. I actually get to make up my own rules, the same as you do. Your point of view, you've written this amazing book, and that's part of you figuring out how you want to show up on your field with your rules.
Right.
And so when we're in a corporate setting, there are rules of the game that we need to play by. But that doesn't mean that we just need to stay in our position. We can think about the impact we want to make on the field. And certainly as you move up in your career, as a CFO, it's not about me adding up any better, right? It's not about me. It's about the impact I can make. It's about the impact that, as a leader, that you can bring. And so your role naturally expands. And, that's why there's people on the field. Some get picked to be captain because they've got leadership and they've got influence and they've got impact, and they can see the game as it's being played out at a bigger level. And so that's kind of adding value at all levels, is moving, up through our own levels. And as we add more value to ourselves, we can actually have more impact for others. And that's part of my philosophy.
And don't you need to have, I think about the newer leaders coming in, there's the Gen Z generation coming in, as they're dealing with the Gen Xers, my generation, baby boomers are still around. It's, there's that emotional intelligence and that human-centric leadership that I don't feel like, and I'll be honest with you, like the Gen Xers really, they're struggling with that human-centered leadership. So, you highlight, relationships, you highlight emotional intelligence, critical, and right? Especially in this era that's dominated by AI, technology, right. We're behind the screens. It's wonderful in some ways, like you're in Australia, I'm in Boston, right? And like, this is cool. We can do this. But how do you see emotional intelligence fundamentally reshaping the role of a leader, beyond traditional management, which is what what my generation is so used to?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Let me, so the way I think about it, I think our job, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, is to figure out who you are at your best. When they say, just go and be yourself, I don't think that's right. I think it's actually, you go and be your best self.
Yeah.
Figure out who that person is against their values, their principles, their priorities, and how they want to show up in the world, right? Whether it's work or at home. And once you know who that person is, that's the job, to show up as that person, to have integrity and authenticity to who you are. And you know what? It's like, it's magnetic when you're around someone who feels really comfortable in who they are. And I don't mean just they're flopping around on their couch. I mean, they're actually showing up. They're not faking anything. It's them. It's the real them. But, they're not slouched over. They're standing strong. They're confident. They're naturally confident, right?
Right.
And so when you show up like that, then you can start to have integrity, and then you can start to tap into your own emotional intelligence and who you are.
Right.
Because you're already on a strong foundation. You're not trying to fake it. You're not trying to please others, which I think is really kind of disingenuous, actually, and takes you away from being who you are.
Right.
So it starts with firstly knowing yourself, okay? And that's not easy. But with help, you can figure that out, actually. And that becomes something that you continue to level up as you learn and grow and you get through new experiences. I'm continually assessing that and redefining that for myself, especially as I shift careers and life, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of the kind of the EQ side, I think that zoom out is super, super important once you've got a strong basis of who you are at your best. And then it's having a bit of compassion and kindness for others to see how they're seeing the world from their perspective and where they're at. And knowing that most of the time it's not about me, actually.
Right.
And not getting defensive. It's more about zooming out and thinking about what game's being played here. Excuse me. Too much talking. It's what game is actually being played here and where are they coming from? If you can understand where someone's coming from, you go from kind of like, if it's a bit of a heat discussion, you go from this and you try and get on their side of the table and you say, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve here?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about us as individuals. It's actually about trying to solve this problem. And how can we solve that? Where are you kind of, what's your, not block, because I don't like to use that word, but where are you sort of stuck at the moment?
Yeah.
And how can we shift that?
And also, do you think it's like where people are coming from? Like my career story is very different from my 25-year-old who's becoming a manager right now, right? So I think that's the other piece too, is like figuring out who you're talking to and where they're actually, like, maybe what their story is and why they're approaching things in a way. Would you agree with that?
100%. That's the empathy bit. And, if you're an older person, you're able to understand a little bit of...
We're both really young.
28. But that's kind of part of the role, right? As you move, it's about helping the younger generation navigate some of that and being able to see it from their perspective, not like this, but able to guide them. And that starts with being open-minded and being able to see something from someone else's perspective, and understanding what the rules of the game are that are currently being played in that dynamic. Like, what's actually happening here?
Yeah. And you talk a lot about the complexities of clarity and alignment. So that, it's some of the other things that you talked about too. You got to be clear and aligned in the visions, right? That's the key to effective leadership. And, why do you think so many leaders struggle to achieve genuine clarity and alignment, even when they believe they're communicating it clearly? Yeah, I feel like our communication styles are so different amongst the generations that I could think, or someone could explain something to me, and it's foreign, right? And me the same. So how do you help those leaders kind of come together with that clarity and alignment? Yeah,
look, I can't speak for the leaders out there. I can speak through my lens and for myself, which is that I think sometimes it's because the leaders aren't clear, right? It starts with the leaders knowing what the strategy is, right? What are we choosing to do with what game? Like, strategy is about understanding where to play and how to win, right? What game are we playing and how are we going to win that game? And then what choices are we going to make around how we want to do that?
Yep.
And so once we know that, it's then about being able to articulate that in a way that, connects with people in an organization or in key stakeholders so that everybody in that organization is able to connect in some way what they do into the execution of that strategy. And that's all around getting strategic alignment and execution.
Gotcha.
And so as a leader and, being chief strategy officer for a number of companies, this is what I had to do. I had to be able to articulate the vision and I had to connect people onto that vision. And it really actually starts with understanding what your why is.
Yes.
Joining that company. And in the healthcare industry, like people have a very strong why. I was at AstraZeneca for many years and the why is around really saving people's lives. Like that actually people enter that organization feeling that their medications are saving people's lives.
Right.
I was at Blackmores, which is one of a large vitamin company in Asia, one of the largest. And that was about the preventative side of healthcare and kind of not needing to get to a pharmaceutical because you were looking after yourself upstream. But that was the mission there around like, let's really be healthy and really stay in a natural kind of state of health. So we don't need to be on, diabetic medication or whatever that might be, heart medication. But it starts with this communication starts with understanding the why. What are we trying to achieve here? And then getting the hearts and minds. I really believe that, if you want excellence, you want that discretionary effort. And that actually comes from a values alignment with who you are and what you're doing and being in the right role in that company and being allowed to grow and being given opportunities to grow and learn. I mean, I say we're either winning or we're learning, right? Finance guys don't like making mistakes. I've made plenty, but mistakes feel painful. Learning feels like growth. So I hope that answers it. But it is really thinking about your audience, and it's thinking about how can I connect with them, particularly if you're a younger person or you're in a different part of the organization, whether you're in the operations area or in sales and marketing, whatever. Everybody has a lens into the way they see the company. Finance guys see it through the numbers. HR people see it through people and culture, right?
Right.
Marketers see it through brands and consumers.
Yeah.
Operations or salespeople see it through the lens of selling and serving customers.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's being able to connect with people through the lens that they're looking at. And as a leader, that's part of it. You need to have an adaptability to be able to resonate with different types of people in how you communicate.
Running a business is hard. Developing your people shouldn't be. At Human Power Solutions, we act as your outsourced chief learning officer, designing custom learning and development experiences that actually move the needle. No fluff, no cookie cutter workshops, just results. Whether your people need better communication, stronger leadership, or less burnout, we provide strategic solutions that align with your goals and keep your team moving forward. Visit hpowersolutions.com and unlock your team's full potential without disrupting operations.
So I want to circle back a little bit to the story that you told a little bit earlier about your childhood and how it kind of impacted your leadership style a little bit, right? We talk about mental health, being vulnerable. You're very honest about what you kind of went through and even when your dad passed away, you took that time off, and that's a lot of vulnerability to show to people. And, especially when we talk about mental health, we'll talk about your foundation in just a little bit, because I want the listeners to hear about that, because it's very near and dear to my heart, as you and I have talked about. But the mental health piece is still stigmatized in the leadership circles, right? And when you do show your vulnerability, you don't really know how it lands, and you may or may not know for a little while. How can we help organizations, not get stuck in the mire, like the weeds of mental health, but how can we help them support, the workers, the employees? Like, how can we train leaders to really not look at that as being a bad thing?
Yeah. look, I don't know about you, Sandra, but we're going to have our ups and downs. Everybody is going to have their ups and downs. It's a fact. It's part of life. And those ups and downs can be very, very different for different people with different circumstances, right?
Yeah.
But it's just firstly recognizing that it's just a part of human nature. Otherwise, we'll all go and get robots, right? They don't have mental health issues, right? But they will lose the human connection. And I'd love, we can talk about that. But so there in Australia, it's been similar. There has been a stigma about, especially for a male.
Yeah.
It's been a sort of a sign of weakness. And what's really interesting is that when you are confident enough to express your vulnerability, it actually comes as confidence, not as weakness.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you do it in the right way, when you own it, when you own who you are. And actually what's really amazing, we were the first ever event we ran through Gotcha for Life, because we've been doing a lot through schools, was actually at my school, was the first event, which coincidentally was Hugh Jackman's school and also the other co-founders of the foundation, because there was two other guys that started it. And it's all about understanding as a modern man that we're going to have these ups and downs and being okay with being vulnerable. And that's just, being okay with that. That's the premise. And actually the main premise, sorry, I missed this point, is that Gotcha for Life is making sure that you got a mate, a Gotcha for Life mate, friend.
Okay. Yeah.
Who can be there for you in the ups and the downs. Someone that's not going to judge you. Someone that's just to be there to listen, or be there to say, hey, no, I don't see it that way at all. You're looking at that wrong, or let's get you some help. And it's because when you start sharing that you're not in the right headspace,
Right.
that just, boy, does that lower the pressure and the weight. It really does. And it helps you make sure you're not going to do something really, really stupid. Okay. And so we had this first event, and there was this boy that stood up, and this guy was, on the football team. Everyone, liked him. Amazing guy.
Yeah.
And he stood up and explained that, he had these mental health challenges. He was crying, and, everybody in that room, it was like you could hear a pin drop. I was like, if he's showing this level of vulnerability, then wow, I can show mine. And it was so powerful. It was completely, unpredicted. He just felt compelled to raise his hand and say, look, I haven't been doing well. And it's because of, some stuff that happened. So the fact is, it's going to happen to everybody. We're all going to have our ups and downs. We need to be able to recognize that and have our own kind of skills and coping mechanisms. But the best thing I think an employer can do is just be understanding, listen. It's not their responsibility to try and solve that,
Right.
unless they're part of the if it's sure that they're got some role to play in a working context, or if they can help, for sure, definitely do that. But often these issues are happening with nothing to do with work. Actually, it's things that happened a long time ago that haven't been resolved. And in fact, this impacted me so much that I realized that I wanted to become a practitioner as someone who could help with emotional healing. It's called self-directed healing, and help release emotions that have been holding us back for many years. And so just like in that bathroom mirror exercise where I was, that this boss was really triggering these emotions back to when I was this young kid, right?
Yep.
And they weren't serving me anymore. And when you can release those emotions, you're not carrying them anymore. You're able to re-examine that situation, and it doesn't hold you back because that wasn't serving me. It didn't need to serve me. So, it's complex because we've all got lots going on in our lives, right?
Yep.
Most people want to do a great job. Most people care about others. But if we've got some things that we're kind of carrying, it means that we may not be showing up as our best selves and not doing right by others. And so sometimes in those cases, we just need a bit of compassion for someone else. And it's like, hey man, you okay? Do you need some help?
Do you think that there's a point where you can be too empathetic as a leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do actually. I do. Because sometimes you,
I can be kind of hardcore, right? I'm an Irish girl from Boston, and I'm okay, but I'm not super compassionate, you know?
yeah,
So I often think about all the stuff that's going on. And I come from the sucking up buttercup, generation.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I've been thinking, like, is there too much empathy?
100%. Too much of anything isn't good, right? Too much water and you'll drown, or even orange juice is not, it's not
Right.
great. Right? So 100%. And, but it's figuring out where that line is, and being adaptable to kind of figure that out. Like, it's almost like you can be so much of a crutch for somebody that they forget how to walk on their own.
Right.
And the aim is being there just to support them enough so that they don't fall over. They get stable on their feet and then have the confidence to then move forward. Sometimes you may need to carry someone forward because they're incapable of walking, right? Of course. And it's knowing where someone's at, to be able to help them do that.
So I hear that personally, but in the business world, you have business to run, right? So you really can't be, I don't think, but maybe, help me with that. How do you know where that line is?
Yeah, man. I think back to some of the jobs I've had. I had one job where we worked the entire team for 36 hours on a systems implementation in Paris. And we just had to get that system in. It was a telecommunications company, and we had to be live on Monday morning. We worked the entire weekend. And but you know why that was? What happened there was we had a very strong strategy. We had a clear vision. We had people that were aligned around what we were trying to do. They were really committed. They were highly valued. We were all in it together. I wasn't expecting anybody to do something I wasn't prepared to do.
Right. Yeah.
And so we had the right dynamic as a team to make that happen. And, I never wanted to do that again, but it was pretty incredible to be part of that. And so, it is about building that team dynamic. It's about understanding and checking in where everybody is on the team. Are they in the right roles? Where are they at? Giving them the help that they need. And, but I also don't believe that, you can carry a player on that team who's not performing.
Right.
For a long period of time.
Yeah, that was my question there.
Yeah. I mean, it is a team. I actually think of it in corporate, it's not a family, it's a team. It's
Great.
maybe if you've got a family business, but, and you want that team to be high performing. You want there to be an awesome dynamic, and you want the best players on that team.
Yeah.
And, if someone is not where they need to be, and you've tried to give them development, and you've tried to help them, maybe it's just not right for them. And some people self-select off, and sometimes, unfortunately, you have to make that tough choice. But when you do that, you do it with compassion, you do it with kindness. And, I had to let, well over 100 people go, actually, through restructurings that I was leading. And, that's not fun. But when you do it with kindness and integrity and compassion, and what I've found in almost all of those cases, people have gone on to better roles, actually. And so in some ways, it's been a blessing for them to go through that. Yes. Yeah.
So when you were, I was listening to you, and you were talking about you're over in France, you've been all over the world, kind of leading different teams. And I was reading in some of the things that we had exchanged back and forth, that living with the French culture through your family dynamics, right, the relationships, that's the cross-cultural piece can be pretty challenging when you're leading in a different culture. How does exposure to diverse countries, diverse cultures, deepen a leader's capacity for empathy in complex situations?
Yeah. So I've got a French wife, actually. We've been married for 23 years. So I live with French culture every day. My daughter's actually living in Paris. So, she's experiencing all of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. I worked in Europe for 7 years. And when I lived in Denmark and I lived in Italy, and I had cultural training in both of those markets. And the amazing thing about when you're in a different culture, you actually learn a lot about your own, because that's kind of the reference point. That's the lens that you look through to, you don't know anything else, to make sense of the world, right?
Yeah.
And so that was really a major insight when I had this cultural training, was how much I learned about my own culture and how we see things, to compare and contrast. And so you can't help but have a more broader understanding of people and the world, because you're experiencing it from different perspectives. Like, that's kind of what intelligence is. Like, if we think about you're working in a company, you start working in that company, you've maybe got a level 1 knowledge of what that business does, but after 6 months, you've got a much deeper knowledge, and so you can discuss a topic with a lot more detail. That's kind of the intelligence and what comes from that. And so when you're exposed to different cultures, that just it's normal, especially if you're open to it and you're interested. I mean, if you lock it down and you're like, gosh, these Italians, they just talk with their hands, and and you're looking at the negatives and the differences in a negative way, well, then you're going to not have a growth mindset around that. But that's one of the joys of getting out there, is seeing things through all these different perspectives.
So for leaders, though, who maybe are leading in a different culture, and maybe employees aren't as receptive to their leadership styles, how do you help leaders, or what advice did you give to leaders who are, have a diverse workforce, that aren't super receptive to their styles, and they're not adapting, and they want to be like, what advice do you give to leaders for that?
Yeah, I think it really starts with, firstly, understanding, you need to understand the culture a bit. And I don't just necessarily mean geography.
Right.
It could be within a function. You think about a regulatory function is going to be very different to the culture in a marketing function.
Yep.
And so it's having an adaptability to be able to communicate with people. And let me explain this, because I think it's a really great question. If you think about the Venn diagram, the circles, and where they overlap, right? Yep. And as a leader, part of the job is to connect with people. And so it's finding where that overlap is. And so
I like that.
And so knowing that, whether it's someone coming from it, let's pick Italians, because we've been talking about them. I love Italians. I've got so many Italian friends. We had an amazing experience living in Italy.
Yeah.
I got to be honest, the working culture is bloody tough. It's
really.
In fact, in my first week, I remember
French.
Well, that's a different one too. But in Italy, I remember the marketing director said to me, Mike, I can't imagine how hard you're going to find it to work here coming from Australia. We're Italians and we find it hard. But the thing is that Italians are, they love their country, they love their culture.
Yeah.
And so you're able just to connect with them and you say, I just think Italy's amazing. I love the culture. I love the food. I love the country. Right?
Yeah.
You've just now got an overlap in your Venn diagram between Australia and Italy.
Gotcha.
Whether it's, if it's something to do in a work setting and you're talking to operations people, maybe it's about the fact that, one of the things I love about our company is just the quality of our products. And, that really starts with having excellent operating processes. And you play a really key role in that. So just want you to know that you're part of the backbone of this company. Bang, that's your state.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And it's just thinking about what value does someone bring to the organization and how can you recognize them for the value that they bring? Mm-hmm. And then how do you build off that? That's how I see it. And our job as leaders is to actually find the common ground. And I'll give you another completely random example, but my daughter was about 5 and she was on a set of swings, and we were down by the beach, and there was a girl next to her, similar age, and they were swinging together, and they were at an age where they could swing. I didn't need to be pushing them, right?
Yeah,
They could
that's so nice.
momentum going themselves. And there was a person standing next to me who was covered in tattoos, and he looked like a pretty rough guy. He just, here I was standing next to him, probably in a button down shirt or something. And, when you look at our circles of the Venn diagram, to look at us, we're probably quite separate.
Right.
And I looked over at him and I smiled, smiling, by the way. Leaders, smile, okay? Just be warm. I smiled at this guy and I said, doesn't that make your heart melt or something? Or isn't it lovely seeing the kids having fun like that? And he responded with a big smile and said, yeah, it makes your heart melt. So right there, we've got an alignment over the circles on the joy of seeing our daughters on the swing. And we spent another 10 minutes talking about that and being a father, and like that circle got to be much more overlapped because I was able to just find a way in. So as a leader, it's about finding a way in to have a connection. Like, we can pick apart all the differences. That doesn't help.
No.
Not in a corporate setting. You actually want to find where there's an alignment and then draw on the strengths of those individuals where there are differences, because business is a team sport, as you know, and it's bringing out the best of those people. But, if people are far away apart, do that.
It's so hard to do that. It really is.
And what's really another thing, Sandra, if you can be the person in your organization that's able to connect others, you become valuable.
No.
You're able to bring out the connection, the dynamic, the cross-functional working, the stakeholder insights that you can bring to other parties. Like, that is when you really start to build high-performing teams. And you can be one of the people that actually is the catalyst to make that happen.
That's great advice for anyone in leadership, not just the up and coming, but anybody in leadership. There's so many leaders that divide, that silo their departments, and no one knows what's going on here. And I think you're really right. Bringing it all together is so key if you can be that catalyst. I love that.
When you're in a state of fear because leadership is being divisive and they're pitting different functions against each other, from period, it might get results. Building's on fire and we got to act quickly, or we've got a regulatory crisis or something that's happening, right?
Yeah.
But it's not sustainable. You burn people out and you can't continue to bring the best of yourself every day to an organization because you're out of your flow, because you're in this fight or flight state. And so we want to get people into that flow state and performing at the higher end of that flow state that becomes sustainable.
Yeah, I had a client a couple of years ago, and they had a leadership team that just wasn't gelling for whatever reason. And I took a little bit of time and met with the individual leaders, by themselves, did about half-hour sessions, just to kind of dig in and see what's going on. And what I found, we talked about working genius and working in your flow. I went back to the CEO and I said, you got two people in the wrong place. They're right for the organization, but they're doing completely wrong jobs for each other. And I basically just said, do some shuffles and magic, because you got people that were doing what they wanted to do. And her pushback to me was, well, they're here to do a job. And I said, yes, but they're not doing their job well. So, and I think sometimes leaders will often say, well, you've been hired for this role and this is what you're hired for. And they lose people because sometimes they get people into a role that they shouldn't be in, but they should be in the organization due to their passion for the organization. I think sometimes leaders don't like to employees have control like that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I love that story. In fact, I had a similar experience where, I had been asked to help really change the dynamic of an executive team
Mhm.
And what I did was I got the team together. We actually had a morning. We had an offsite, and it was a morning. We actually did yoga in the morning, and then we were down by the beach, and it was a health company, and we sat around at the beach in a circle, and I got everybody to share what was their reason for joining the business, what was their why, right?
Yeah.
And without really thinking about it back then, what I was doing was I was getting the Venn diagram happening for people to connect together on what the why was. And it really brought out some really amazing stories, of why they were connected into the healthcare industry, because, these people could have been working in many different companies,
Yeah.
right? And it opened the door to reset what was quite a dysfunctional dynamic to firstly understanding and
Mhm.
building connection, and then realigning people around not just thinking in a siloed, but thinking as these are executives, right? Their role as an executive extended beyond their function and how they could make an impact.
Right.
And we set that dynamic as a team. But it all starts with, being a bit open, a little bit vulnerable, explaining your why, coming from a place of, I want to find a better way. I want this to work.
Yeah.
Because what will happen is if you start getting that team dynamic and there's one person that's not on board with that, it's going to be pretty obvious that, culturally now that culture shifted, and they're either going to make it work or they're not. And they're going to find that pretty difficult.
Mm. Oh, it's been such a good. I could go on and on today for sure. If you could offer, I'm just going to close this out a little bit. If you could offer one piece of advice to leaders trying to navigate today's complex world, right? AI, all the technology, the multi-generations in the workplace, just all the different choices, everything going on. What was one piece of advice you would give to those leaders for their own sake, for their own mental health, and to be successable?
Man, that's a massive question, Sandra.
I know.
Let me give that my best shot. First thing I would say is that, the technology is here to serve us, okay? And it's only going to increase. We know that.
Right.
But we've got to use it in the right way. And when we use it, it's like a knife, right? It can cut you if you don't use it right, or it can be a fantastic tool. And so when it comes to, let's just say AI and using ChatGPT, because it's very topical at the moment, we need to use that tool appropriately. And let me share something personal with you, which we were discussing off camera, for a while, I was leveraging ChatGPT to help me with my emails. I was giving it the story I wanted it, and then I was getting it to write it. And I was sitting back saying, this is fantastic. I can write 10 emails in, 2 minutes. It's amazing. But I actually made a really conscious shift a little while ago that I was going to write my own emails. I was going to use my voice completely and tell the story in the way that I wanted to express that. And what I noticed is that my email open rates went from 30% to 55%.
Yeah.
And so it's a really good example where even though you can use that technology, actually people can smell it if it's not genuine and it's written in a way that feels like it's synthetic, right?
Yeah.
And being able to talk to people and communicate with people is vital. So we have to learn how to use that tool. And I can certainly use ChatGPT in many ways. But if I'm trying to connect with people as an executive coach, then it's important that they know that it's me and I see myself properly. So in a work context, we've had technology for years. As a finance guy, we went from doing the numbers in our head to a calculator, to a spreadsheet, to a, system, and now complex, reporting modules, right? It's always there. But we need to be able to think about how we leverage that technology in the best possible way, not be afraid of it. Ahead of the curve, ahead of the wave that's coming. And it is obviously coming. If you were someone with a shovel and a mattock and a pitchfork, back in the, 1800s, and along comes the industrialization, you're out of a job. So you've got to reskill. So what do you do? And so people do need to be thinking about what's next for me? Where do I want to go? Because that technology wave is coming quickly.
Right.
If you believe what everybody's saying, way quicker than we probably can conceptualize. So it's about figuring out what it is that you can bring to the world, showing up as this best version of you, authentically who you are, unlocking that. And doing those things that you feel really passionate and you've got good skills and experience and capabilities in. Because the thing is, Sandra, the world, no one, your partner, the people that love and care about you, your kids, your boss, they don't want you playing small. Mm-hmm. They want you to figure out who you are at your best and to show up as that person. And for a long time, I played small and I didn't go for it when I really should have. But really what I encourage people to do is not be reckless, but go for the growth-based choice, right? And if there are things that something's holding you back, and we all get it, find someone that can help you. Remove that. Because the world does not want you playing small. And it wants you to thrive. It wants you to succeed. And so to really unlock that for yourself and have the confidence that you're able to figure out a way to make that happen for you.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for today. And I'm sure that people are going to want to connect with you, especially just given how you coach and how you talk and connect with people. So how do people get in touch with you? And how, I was saying to you earlier, which is why we got in the topic of the emails, is when I told you how much I love your emails because they feel like they're talking to me. And so love to get people connected to you, at least get your emails.
Yeah, they can go to Avaaler.com and they can sign up there, or they can follow me on LinkedIn, Mike Charter. That's a really great place to connect with me, particularly for your audience who will have a LinkedIn profile, I'm sure. I'm putting content out all the time. And I just love being that catalyst for positive outcomes. And I think if we can raise that in everybody, it's going to make the world a better place. They're going to be better leaders. They're going to be better role models, better parents.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and I really truly believe being the best role model you can be is one of the most important jobs in the world.
Mike, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience?
I think the final thing I'd say is just keep availing, keep adding value and making an impact. And I'd love to connect with people out there who feel that way.
Well, I thank you. And I think you are going to impact more than 10 million people. You're on such a great trajectory. And thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
I've really enjoyed this. And thanks for everything you're doing, Sandra. I know you've got an amazing business that you're running and helping lots of corporates and people within those businesses. And I love your book as well. So thank you for it.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thanks.
Bye.
That's a wrap on this episode of the People Profit Podcast. If you found a nugget of wisdom or even just a spark of inspiration, share the love, subscribe, leave us a review, and pass the episode along to a colleague who's ready to build a people-first culture. Big thanks to our sponsor, Human Power Solutions, for championing workplace where humans thrive and profits rise. Want to learn how they can energize your team? Head over to hpowersolutions.com to get started. I'm Sandra Coker, reminding you that when you invest in people, you invest in profit. See you next time.